Yeah, so today I want to talk about CATIA sketch constraints. So I'm in the CATIA part design workbench, and so I've got my default reference planes available. So I'm going to create a sketch. So what can you sketch on in CATIA? That's a good question to ask before I begin here. So in CATIA, you can sketch on really any reference plane, any flat part surface, or plane of an axis system. So those are three things that make for valid entities that you can sketch on. So the most obvious thing I have available right now is one of my three default reference planes. So I'm going to go to the sketch tool, and then I'm going to select the plane I'd like to sketch upon, and you can select that plane on the screen, or you can select it on the tree. So I'll select it on the tree. So when we get into the sketching environment, you'll see that on the specification tree, I have the sketch started under the part body. I'm not working in geometric sets here, so I'm just working under the standard part body. So I've got my sketch started. If I were to open this up, you're going to see that I have an absolute axis system available right now. If I were to open that up, you're going to see that I have an origin, and I have a horizontal direction, and I have a vertical direction, and those are represented on the screen here. You can see the horizontal direction, you can see the vertical direction. It's kind of hard to see the origin, but it is there, and it's a little point right at the center of my working environment. There are ways to change these orientations and also the origin, but I will say that for another video lecture. So today I'm primarily interested in CATIA constraints. So there are two types of constraints, and two broad categories of constraints in CATIA. First, there are geometrical constraints, and second, there are dimensional constraints. So let's talk about geometrical constraints first. So I'm going to come out here just in space. Now, I will encourage you not just to work out in space. Always tie your sketches into the current axis system or default reference planes, depending on how you're working. But just for right now, I'm going to start out here in space. So I'm going to start sketching just a horizontal line. So I'm going to sketch a line. If you notice right here that this, and this, by the way, and I should point this out, is how CATIA is kind of out of the box. And I would say out of the box, but that may not be true. There are some settings that allow this to happen, and I'll show you turning off some settings and turning on some settings in order to get this to work. But the way I have this set up now, whenever I get this close to horizontal, you're going to see that snap to be horizontal. So what's happening there is that is creating a horizontal constraint. Well, at least it appears to be creating a horizontal constraint. So I'm going to create that, and you should see an H pop in here. So that H represents horizontal. Okay, so I have, and then notice on the tree what happens. I have geometry that's been created. So I have a line between 2 points. This is the primary reason why I created this out in space here, is because I wanted you to see that I have 2 points and a line. This line is standard geometry, and the 2 points are construction geometry. Now, how do you know this? Well, I want to take my Sketch Tools toolbar, just put it out here where I can see it better. So if you notice this option, so always leave, by the way, always leave your Sketch Tools toolbar open. Never close it down. When you start CATIA, it could be up here, it could be down here, it could be somewhere, but always put it where you can see it. And so notice this option right here. It's the third from the left. And so if I select this line, which is white on the screen, but if I select that line, then notice that it's blue. And blue represents standard elements, or I call it standard geometry, but standard elements. Now if I come over here and select the point, notice it's orange. So that represents construction geometry. I'm assuming it's orange. It looks orange. I'm colorblind, by the way, so if I get my colors mixed up, I apologize. So again, if I select this, you get the blue. That means standard geometry. If I select the line as it is, it's construction geometry. So I can toggle this line to be construction geometry, and this is what it would look like. And then I can toggle it back to be standard geometry. Now, so we've got a horizontal. That's my first geometrical constraint I want you to know about. So you have horizontal. It's not really horizontal behind the scenes, but I won't get into that right now. So let's look at some more constraints. And let me do another one too. So just to point out what's going on here. So notice also in the Sketch Tools toolbar that I have the fourth from the left, an option here called geometrical constraints. And notice that it's selected. So it's orange, so that means it's selected. So, but if I unselect that, let's see what happens if I do another line across here. So select and do a line. So it still pops like it's snapping there. But notice when I create the line, it doesn't have the H. It's not constrained geometrically. So what that's telling me is that this option will dynamically create your horizontal constraints. This option will dynamically create your geometrical constraints. So I like to have that turned on. So I'm going to go back and I'm going to turn that on and leave it turned on. And if for some reason you see that you're not dynamically creating your geometrical constraints, this is the tool for turning it back on. Now, sometimes that can be a problem. You got to be careful when you're creating a complex sketch that you don't create geometrical constraints that you don't want to create. So let me begin here. So I'm going to come in, I'm going to just create individual lines. So I'm going to come in here and I'm going to go to the endpoint of this line. And notice, by the way, notice if I'm running notice if I'm running my mouse over the line, you get this little symbol. I look in the upper left-hand corner above my mouse. You see two concentric circles that does not have a solid center. That is creating a coincident constraint. Okay, but it's not a point-on-point coincident constraint. So that is creating a constraint. So let me create that. And I'm just going to pick out here in space. So what happens behind the scenes here? So I'm going to go to my constraints tab and notice it created this coincident constraint. And so, by the way, notice what I said about the horizontal constraint. It's horizontal or labeled as H here, but it's showing parallel over here. What that H really means, and I want you to think of that H as horizontal, but what the H represents is that this line is parallel to the horizontal axis. So the H represents horizontal axis, and this line is parallel to the horizontal axis. And notice you can see the parallel constraint here on the screen. That's kind of a trick question I like to have. But notice right here that this is a coincident constraint. Coincident means they share the similar or the same location. I'm going to, and so that was created because I did this point on a line. So I want to erase this. And let's try this. I want to come in. Oh, let me back up and do this again. So I'm going to come in. I'm going to go in. And this time I'm going to go to the endpoint. So when I go to the endpoint, notice I get those two concentric circles, but the middle is now filled. So if I create a similar line, notice I don't get the coincident option available here. And then notice I also don't get a constraint here on the tree. So when you do a point-on-point like I did there, it will snap this line to the end of this line, but it doesn't create a constraint that you can go back and modify or delete later. So that's a point-on-point condition. So just be careful. I mean, that's capturing my design intent, and that's what I want. But just keep in mind, once you do that, you can't go back and unconnect these two easily, at least. So I want to make this line vertical. So how do I do that? This is another little option here. So I can come in, I can select that. I can come up here. There's a couple of different ways to do this. I can come up here. I can go to this tool called Constraints Defined in Dialog Box. And this, by the way, is on the Constraint toolbar. I'm just going to pull that out so you can see it. So I can pre-select this line, I can come in here and I can go constraints defined in dialog box, and then I can pick vertical, and notice that it pops it vertical, okay, which is what I was looking for here. And that's the way I do it. So I will pre-select an entity, and then I'll come up here in this tool that has a long name, and it's called Constraints Defined in Dialog Box. So there's two different geometrical, actually we've covered three different geometrical constraints so far. We've covered horizontal, we've covered vertical, and we've covered coincident, even though there's not one on the screen right now. But by the way, also notice that this vertical is really a parallel to the vertical axis, just to keep that in mind. Now what if so I'm going to go back and I'm going to make sure that this point here is coincident with this point. So how would I do that? So this is for me, the way, there's a couple different ways to do it, and I'll show you both ways. But one way is to come in and use the control key to pre-select those two. So notice I selected one, and then I held down the control key, and then I selected the second. So I've got these two pre-selected. You can see this on the tree. I've got the origin selected, and I've got this point selected. So those are pre-selected. Then I can come to my Constraints Defined in Dialog Box tool. I can select Coincident, and then notice it brings it coincident. And then even when you do it this way, it is not a dynamic point-on-point, so it does give you a coincident here that you can delete later if you need to. So I'm going to cancel that so I don't do it, so I can show you the other way. And the other way to do it starts out the same. I'm going to pre-select these two. Okay, so they're pre-selected. And then I'm going to go to the constraint option. Notice it's just to the right of the Constraints Defined in Dialog Box. I primarily use this one for geometrical constraints, and I use this tool for dimensional constraints. But I'm going to use this one now. And notice it's going to try to create a dimensional constraint between the two. But I can right-click here, and I can go coincident or coincidence and apply that, and it makes it coincident. So that's another way to do it. So let's look at some more constraints. Let me draw an arc, and we can talk about tangent. So I'm just going to sketch in a 3-point arc. And then notice whenever I'm sketching this, that when I get it right over that vertical axis, notice the two lines. Those are going to create, and then let me just select there. So those created, and here's an example of me being not careful, and I created this is a good learning point. For any mistake is a good opportunity to learn something. So in doing this arc, I accidentally created a tangent constraint right there, which I did not want. So that's an example of being very, very careful when you're doing dynamic constraints. So I wanted to delete that. Okay, so I had two lines here that just showed that I was lined up with this vertical axis, and I was lined up horizontally here. Now what I want to do, I do want to create a tangent constraint. I did not want it down here, so just be very careful there. By the way, you can hold the shift key down, get a learning point here, and it will override dynamic constraint creation. So I want to create a tangent between here and here. So I'm going to pre-select those two, and I can come up here to my Constraints Defined in Dialog Box, and I can select tangent, and there's my tangent constraint. Now let me close this out. I can come in here, and I can do, that's a point-on-point, so that's not going to create a coincident over here on the tree. That's a point-on-point, so notice it didn't create the coincident. And then I'm going to do another point-on-point here that came in with a vertical. You can see the parallel of the vertical axis there. Now let's create a tangent on this side. So pre-select those two. So notice I'm holding down the control key. You don't have to really have the control key on the first one, but I typically do. And then control select that one. Constraints Defined in Dialog Box, and I got tangent. So there's my two tangent constraints. So look at what I have on the screen now. So I have horizontal, two vertical geometrical constraints, and two tangent geometrical constraints. And one coincident here. And you can see these on the tree. Parallel, which is a horizontal, vertical. This last parallel is a vertical. And then I have a coincident here, which was the snap to the origin, and then two tangencies. And these can be modified and deleted. If you see them on the tree there, they can be modified or deleted. So that's good to know. So what else do we have that we can use that might be useful? So another one is a perpendicular. So what I want to do, just to show you can do this, I can actually come in, as I said, select that vertical and delete it. I just hit the delete key on the keyboard, and now notice that's not vertical anymore. So, and I just want to demo that I can do a perpendicularity between these two. So another geometrical constraint is perpendicularity, so I can select here and here, come in, and then select oh, by the way, so while we're looking at the screen, before I hit perpendicular here, I'll go ahead and select it, but you can see the other constraints that are possible. So you have horizontal, I just did perpendicularity, parallelism. You have tangency is possible. Fix, which I do not allow my students to use. We have coincidence, I've talked about already. Vertical, I've talked about. Equal makes two entities the same size. And then you got some dimensional constraints over here, distance, length, and angle. So let's just roll with perpendicularity here. And you can see the symbol right here for perpendicularity. I'm going to, I'll keep rolling with this. So let's do a concentric constraint next. So I want to come over, I'm going to draw a circle. I'm just going to draw it. Usually I would just snap right here. Notice when I snap right here, I can draw my circle. Since I did a point-on-point snap, it doesn't show you a constraint, which is fine, but I want to do this instead just for demo purposes. I want to come in over here, just kind of draw it off to the side. So the concentric means essentially two parallel circles. So I can do a pre-select here and a pre-select here. So notice I'm going circle, arc. It doesn't matter whether they're arcs or circles, as long as they're circular in nature. And then I can do a concentricity, and then notice now they share the common center, and that's what concentricity means. They share that common center. Okay. So so far so good. Another thing I'd like to show you is symmetry. I will show you that here in a few minutes, but let's get into a couple of dimensional constraints here. So that covers most of the geometrical constraints, but let's talk about dimensional constraints. So I want to come in here and I want to show you, just do the length of this line here. So I can select that line, and then I can come up to the constraint option, and then notice that is showing me the length of this line. And if you're looking down here, notice I've got a length value, and that can be modified. So if I wanted to make that 3, you can make it 3. Now notice that length, and then notice also here, if I did this little number, pre-select there and there, these two lines, put my dimension in, it looks the same, right? There's my 3. But if you look over at the tree, that is not a length constraint, that's an offset constraint. Then there's a difference there as far as the constraints in CATIA. The first one was the length of a line. This one is the distance between these two parallel lines. So this depends on what you're trying to capture as far as your design intent. A lot of times it doesn't matter which one you select. This one I tend to like to do more, even though it does require an extra pick, because it helps creating rounded surrounds between your corners here a little better. That's just my opinion. So let's do a length of this line. So by the way, notice I don't have to pre-select it. I can come straight over here and go constraint, and then I can select the line and then create it. All right. So there's two dimensional constraints. We have offset and we have length. What about this one? So I can select here and select there. Now, it's not letting me create that. See, notice that turned purple. Purple means it's over constrained. So what it's trying to do here is create the arc radius. And that radius is already defined by this dimension here at the bottom, which is this offset. So I'm going to just erase that offset. Purple's not good. So, and white's not good either as far as this class is concerned. Everything needs to be green. So I'm going to come in, I'm going to select this arc, and notice it gave me my 1.5 radius. But if you look over here at the tree, I tried to hide that. Notice it's it's giving me that radius, so that's a radius constraint. So far as dimensional constraints, we've seen offset, we've seen length, and now we've seen radius. So now let's look at a diameter. So I'm going to come in again, same constraint tool. I'm going to select this circle, and notice it recognizes it as a circle, so it gives me a diameter value here of 1.802, which of course can be modified if you need to. And so what did it give me behind the scenes? It gave me a radius. So that's going to be important later. It showed it as a diameter, but behind the scenes it's really a radius. So if I look at it, I double tap it here, so it's showing that it's a 2 and it's being shown as a diameter. I can change that to radius if I wanted to, but still behind the scenes it's still a diameter as far as CATIA is concerned, and that's going to be important later, especially when we do formulas. So notice I have a nice green sketch. I require green sketches. I require all your sketches to be at least green. Sometimes you can be there's some other colors, but it can't be white. Okay, you cannot have any white geometry. So there, one more dimensional constraint I want to show you, and let me think about how to do this. I'm going to show you angularity. So let me delete that perpendicularity there, and I'm going to delete that. And so what I want to try to do here is do an angle here. All right, so I wanted to create an angle between here and here, so I can come here and pick my, just notice the process I'm doing here. So I can do constraint, then I can select there, and then notice it's trying to do another length, but that's okay. I can just go immediately here and pick this line, and it's going to give me an angle. And you can, depending on where you try to pick it, select on the screen, you can pick it, and then it's going to put it in. And you can actually change the sectors, how that's going to be displayed. I want to leave it at sector 3. Now, there's my angle, but notice I'm still white here, which white is bad. So why am I white? Well, what I recommend doing is just trying to move your white geometry to see where you're not constrained. And so I've got that angle in there, but I'm missing symmetry. So I want to show you a little trick here, dealing with symmetry. This is a trick, but it could come in handy. I'm going to sketch a line, and I'm just going to come down from the center. So notice I'm going to do a point-on-point coincident. It's going to go vertical. This is a trick, by the way. So, and I need to make sure this is, construction. And so I'm going to come in, and let's do a symmetry between these two, symmetrical around this line. So the way to do that is you pre-select the two entities that need to be symmetric to each other, and then again pre-select holding the control key down. The third selection is going to be the axis of symmetry. So always keep that in mind. You're picking 3 things here. The 2 entities that are going to be symmetric, and then the axis of symmetry is always the third one. So whenever I come in here, I can pick my constraints defined in dialog box. There's my symmetry option. And so when I select that now, these are symmetrical to each other around this axis. So that's a little trick I like to do. I'm going to show you another way to do symmetry here in just a moment, but notice it's green, and that's good, right, for this. So that's fully defined, meeting my design intent based off of my constraints. So let me erase everything here. So I'm just going to do that little number. right, so I'm still in the sketch. So I'm just going to, let's do this. I'm going to come in and just draw a box. Oops, I need to make sure that it's standard geometry. So notice I picked on the Sketch Tools toolbar, went back, made sure that standard geometry was selected there. So I can come in, there's my box. So let's just do a symmetry here. So I want to make these two vertical lines symmetrical around the vertical axis, and then I want to make these two horizontal lines symmetrical around the horizontal axis. So again, this is just a demonstration, again, a second demonstration of symmetry. So use the control key, pre-select in order the two entities that are going to be symmetric, and then the third selection is going to be the axis of symmetry, constraints defined in dialog box, symmetry. And then again, for these two, symmetrical over horizontal axis, symmetry. So there's my symmetry that's captured. So when I do that, notice it's keeping it symmetrical. Now to make it green, all I need to do is apply some length constraints, and that's green with my, and this is what you're looking for in your design, to have your world here in the center. That's fine as long as it meets your design intent. And so that's symmetry. So that's all I want to cover here. I'm going to tell you what, I'll cover one more. Let's do equal. So let me get rid of this and let's do an equal length. So I can pre-select here and here. So notice I got one dimension, so I've got white here. So that means that this is not constrained, right? So let's select that line and this line. I can come up to constraints defined in dialog box, and I can go equal. Now it makes these two equal to each other. So this is a square, right? So that's a good example of a way to make a square. And it keeps it square based off of one dimension versus two. So those are constraints. Get out of my sketch and do whatever you want to do to this. In this case, if I want to do a pad, I can do a pad. I hope that helps. Have a great day.